Good morning, and we're live, and there's actually sound on the laptop this time. I got to look at a video from 2 weeks ago, and for some reason the sound was not working on the laptop. So the locals and the recording I did to the laptop didn't have any sound. I uploaded to Rumble. I was like, what in the world? So I had to go back and do the Facebook version, download that, reload up all that, and got that figured out. But the sound is working now. Apologize for missing last week, Easter Sunday. Unfortunately, I had to spend in a clinic with Rosie to make sure her foot wasn't broken. It was not, thankfully. But I think that was probably the first Sunday school lesson I've missed in like 3 years. So I certainly do apologize for that. But we're back on track. So we're back on track. Still doing Hebrews, book of Hebrews, chapter 9. We're going to try and finish up the second half of Hebrews, chapter 9. Almost really like the 2/3. Because we only covered 10 verses last time, so we're going to try and squeeze in 11 through 26 to 28, which is the rest of the chapter. Real quick, the eclipse is going to happen in a couple of days, and I shared on Facebook a video from Pastor Vlad, who's an interesting guy. I don't know that I totally agree 100% with everything, but he does say some very good things, some very interesting things, and he has a great video on explaining why we shouldn't get all super excited about the eclipse and the fact that there's a bunch of towns in America named Jonah. I mean, really, it's an excellent video. It's 11 minutes long. Take a moment, check it out, share it with your friends. Always people asking questions. What does this mean? What does this mean? And the biggest thing I think with that is that this is, America's not Israel, so we're not listed in prophecy. So the things that happen prophecy-wise are centered around the Middle East. They're not around America. But check out his video. Have a better understanding of what the eclipse really means biblically. And take it as a moment to educate your friends and your fellow people in church. Make sure that they're looking at things biblically, not in any other form or fashion, especially if they're going to claim to be teachers or, a lot of people out there making all these videos where they want clickbait because they want to scare you into something. So, lot to cover. We're going to jump right into this. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11. So last time we talked about the holy place, right? So the tabernacle, the temple eventually, obviously starting out from the Garden of Eden to the tabernacle that was portable to the actual physical temple. And again, there will be a third temple coming up in the future. And that's what Paul's going to get into here in the rest of chapter 9. And that is a copy of what's in heaven. It's representative of heaven itself, throne room of God. If you go in to read Revelation and the descriptions that John gives of what heaven, with the throne, I'll say what heaven looks like, what the throne room of God looks like in heaven, it matches a whole lot of what we have in the tabernacle and in the temple. And so this is the place where you go to meet God and in his temple and his heaven and his throne room. Like I said, the mercy seat of Christ upon the Ark of the Covenant is representative of the actual throne. Like, kings and queens, wherever monarchs sit in some big fancy chair in a room where they receive people. People come to see them and ask things of them or speak to them for political or whatever reasons, and just matters of the kingdom. They go, and of course they have some grand throne that they sit upon, right? So what we have on earth, what we have had and what we will have again, like I said, the third temple is yet to be built. So what we have is a representation of heaven. So let's see here. All right. So in order to go into the temple, in order to get into the Holy of Holies, and so there's different walls. There's the tent. There's the outer wall around the actual tabernacle. Once you get inside, there's the first tent, and then within the tent, there's the holy place, and you have the Holy of Holies, right? So you kind of have these different layers to go through, and you have to be of a certain purification to get into those places. Obviously, you have to be the most purified to enter into the Holy of Holies. So that ties in with the whole connection to Christ and his sacrifice, right? So chapter 9, verse 11. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, and thus securing eternal redemption. So obviously it's as a copy. If you ever been in kind of an office area, I know at work we have copies of copies of copies of copies, and the quality degrades. Now, in this case, the tabernacle, the temple, is not that you just keep building it over and over again, but it's human hands, sinful flesh hands, building something for God. And so we are not of a purification level high enough for that to be a permanent, long-lasting thing. Anything we can do is temporary. I mean, obviously, God did away with the Garden of Eden. Eventually, I think it was gone, certainly by the flood. But the Garden of Eden's gone, and so it was temporary. The tabernacle was temporary as they were nomadically living in the wilderness and wandering around for 40 years. And so once that was finished and Solomon was actually able to build the temple, that was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed in 70 AD. We're going to have to build a third one. If God had actually built the temple, it would not have been destroyed, cannot be destroyed, and so it would still be standing. But in this case, humans are building it, so therefore humans are temporary. Humans can't do the stuff that God can do in the ways that God can do it, right? I don't care how well you build a structure. I mean, even the pyramids that have lasted. So the pyramids they were built after the flood, obviously. Should be obvious. If you follow biblical timeline, the pyramids were built way after the flood. And they have lasted a long time. Don't get me wrong. This is not like building a stucco home down in Florida that's going to get wiped out by a hurricane. We're talking about stone pyramids. Very difficult to build. So they're still standing. The Sphinx, although it has some damage, it's still standing. A lot of Roman architecture has damage, but a lot of it's still standing. So, we can build some tremendous things that will last a long time. I don't know that I would compare that to a modern skyscraper, because modern skyscrapers get torn down all the time and rebuilt. Storms can come over. That a lot of destruction can happen to these things. But still, none of that compares with God and his ability to make something that's eternal. Let's see here. So, what we have here on earth, again, is temporary. And so what Christ was able to do through his sacrifice and through his blood, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his blood, that's what we're going to get into here in just a moment, he was able to enter into the throne room of heaven for us. So he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. If anybody out there wants to argue whether or not salvation is eternal, Hebrews chapter 9 is for them. The whole book of Hebrews, really, but you can take them straight to chapter 9 here. Thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, to purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So again, if you go back into Levitical law and what they had to do to purify themselves to get into the Holy of Holies, hyssop, which is it's like an herb, it's a plant, and they would dip that in the blood of a sacrificed animal, a goat, some type of bull, heifer, whatever. They would dip that in the blood and they would use that to sprinkle everything. And so everything's covered in blood. They would sprinkle themselves with blood. They would sprinkle their scrolls or whatever they had to take with them with blood in order to purify them. To cover them by the... That's where we get the phrase covered by the blood. That's mentioned in the Bible, but that's why we use it so much, because the blood of an innocent victim covers the sins of the individual, so that we are then able to go before a holy God that does not want to look upon sin. And so Christ was able to actually go using his own blood to stand before God, and we are then covered by his blood. And his blood is then an eternal thing. So we're eternally covered by the blood of Christ, which means we are eternally able to stand before a holy and just God who doesn't want to look upon sin. All right? So your verse 15. All right, verse 15. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Something you may have heard, hopefully have heard in the previous time, Easters and stuff, but one of the things Christ said from the cross was tetelestai. And it's a multifaceted word for legal meanings. And tetelestai in Greek it could be used in financial transactions, in other words, paid in full. It could be used in the reading of a will. When somebody passes away and their will is read through and enacted, it can only be enacted when they die. That's what they just said. And so when the lawyer, priest, whoever's overseeing the administration of that will, the word tetelestai will come up when the will is completed. There's also a military meeting. So generals or somebody declaring absolute victory over their enemies would say tetelestai, right? So there is a legal connotation here. One of the reasons Paul uses this terminology to talk about a will, last will and testament, right? And so it took the death of Christ for a number of things to be fulfilled, for a number of things to be satisfied legally, spiritually, morally, all that, for God, in order to restore us back to God. That's here. So therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For with the blood of calves and goats, with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you." So we call it the scarlet thread of redemption. Starts at the Garden of Eden, goes all the way throughout the Bible. In order to, when Adam and Eve sinned and realized they were naked. In other words, I love how Jordan Peterson looks at this. He says they realized that they were vulnerable. So as long as they were in the presence of God, they were protected. They could be naked all they want to. They didn't need any kind of protection, any kind of covering for anything. So then when they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they no longer were under the protection of God. They needed to be covered, which also, their sins had to be covered. They were now vulnerable. And so an animal, didn't say which one, didn't say what kind of animal, but an animal was sacrificed to make covering. So God killed an animal, an innocent animal, to cover their nakedness. Why were they naked? Because they sinned. So the nakedness of sin, that vulnerability, had to be protected, had to be covered and protected. All right, so that was your initial shedding of blood. And as you read through the Bible and you follow that scarlet thread of redemption that leads us to Christ, you find that again, the blood sacrifice has to be made. It also signified, we don't do this anymore because of disease and whatnot, but we're blood brothers, right? And we cut our hands and we shake, and then our blood mingles together. Like I said, we don't do that anymore. Probably a wise thing not to do anymore, just because we don't know what kind of weird diseases are out there that some government's foisting upon us. But that goes back to this whole covenant idea. And in order to make something permanent, to show that it has meaning, you sacrifice something of value. Well, what was of value? Some of your livestock that would feed you and your family. So you sacrifice something of value in order to provide for and guarantee whatever contractual obligation, which, pardon me, again, makes it a covenant, not a contract. Contracts can be broken. Covenants cannot. Covenants can only be superseded by another covenant. So while the initial covenant, it was kind of an unspoken thing with the initial sacrifice of the animal to cover Adam and Eve, eventually the covenant with Abraham, the covenant with Noah replaced that. The covenant with Abraham replaced that, and so on and so forth. Well, the covenant we now have with Christ, the eternal covenant, because of his eternal salvation, his eternal redemption, that now replaces the previous covenant. But again, it doesn't go into effect until there's the shedding of some blood. Well, whose blood was shed? Christ's blood was shed. So that began the new covenant moving forward. Let's see here. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood, for when every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant that God commanded for you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Go back to Exodus and read through that, and you'll see where Moses had to sprinkle all the Israelites with blood. And he sprinkled the tent, and he sprinkled the different, whatever. It says the book, it would have been like the Ten Commandments. Anything that was meant to be used to signify or to worship, again, to purify the people. They're coming out of Egypt. They're coming away from those false gods and the false religions. And so they had to be purified, to be reconciled back unto God. And so to be purified, they had to be sprinkled with blood. Today, that'd be pretty nasty. I couldn't imagine the smell of all that. But thank God we don't have to do sacrifices today. So, let's see here. Thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites. So this is verse 23. But the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. If you remember the Tower of Babel, you can't get there from here. They tried at the Tower of Babel to build a tower that would reach them up into the heavens so they'd be like God. Can't do it. God stopped them, but even in the case of, say think about the tallest building in the world right now. It's in Dubai, I believe. Space is 100 and 200 and I just saw this on a video talking about a plane that flew, the Russian fighter jet pilot that flew at a height of 130-something thousand feet. Space doesn't actually, quote unquote, space doesn't actually start until 200, like twice that height, so 264,000 feet. So if you even wanted to get from the first heaven, which is our normal regular atmosphere, if you want to get from there to the second heaven, which is outer space, you got to go like 250 plus thousand feet up. Nobody can build a building like that. Nobody. And so any idea that we might have of us being able to build a tower up into heaven so we could put ourselves up, who's going to get to be at the top of that? It's going to be small. The pyramids all got pointy. If you look at all the tallest skyscrapers, they all end up getting pointy at the top. You have to have a wide base so it's stable, right? And then it gets smaller because materials are heavy and you have to be able to get them up so high. So, any structure we're going to be able to build is going to get very tiny. And so once you get to the top, I say that, it's narrow. And so once you get to the top, there's only room for so many people. So whatever earthly contraptions we come up with to put ourselves at some high pinnacle of whatever is small, and it's, again, only a limited number of people. So there's no room for everybody. So in truth, only a certain few people that can afford to live at the very top of whatever that building is are the ones who get to be close to God and close to heaven. Obviously they're not getting there just because they're in that position. We can't even get to space. There's, and I don't get this due to orbits and rotations and all this other stuff, but when you talk about the way the moon travels and people want to build an elevator system to the moon, that's a real thing. There's people trying to figure out how to do that. But even in that case, only a select few are going to be able to ride that mythical elevator to the moon if they ever were to come up with something of that nature. I just don't know how that would work. certainly not within the first heaven, the first or initial atmosphere. But anyway, the idea being, though, that even back at the Tower of Babel, there's only a select few that get to go. There's only a select few that are fit at the top, and it's whoever's the wealthiest, whoever's the strongest. That was the thing about Nimrod as the king back then. He was very strong. He was an excellent hunter and fighter, so he was able to put himself in this high position. That's not biblical. It's not godly. That's greed. That's all kinds of stuff that just doesn't work. And so, that's why we can't get to heaven on our own. There's just no room in what man is capable of. And we're capable of a lot. It's still limited, certainly in comparison to God. So if we were to put ourselves in that position to be able to get into heaven, you can't build a tower tall enough. So what do we have to do? We have to rely upon Christ. Christ is the way to heaven. Nothing else is going to get you there. And then it's the death of Christ and the shedding of his blood. And then we are covered in his blood, just as Moses had to cover the Israelites in the blood of calves and goats and stuff to establish their covenant from when they came out of Egypt to be purified. We have to be purified and covered by the blood of Christ in order for us to be able to go into the presence of God. God doesn't want to be around a bunch of sinful people. He just doesn't. That's the whole purpose for the redemption of our sins. And without blood, there is no redemption of sin. There's no forgiveness. It's again, that innocent animal had to be killed because Adam and Eve sinned in the garden in order to cover their sinfulness, their nakedness. So we have to keep that in mind, and the whole purpose, we've ended up where we don't want to talk about the icky blood stuff. It's icky. Ew. It's blood. Blood's nasty. And it is. It does. It stinks. You go around some of these food processing plants, butcher shops. They smell pretty nasty. I've been around chicken plants, and they smell nasty. From the outside. I've known people that have gone on the inside. I haven't done that yet, but I know people that have gone on the inside and they just about threw up on the inside. Blood is not something that smells good, but it is required for the remission of sins. So, thankfully, we are spiritually covered by the blood of Christ, not physically. It's not, you don't have to actually be covered in blood. Thankfully, it's a spiritual covering that Christ provides us so that we're able to enter into the throne room of heaven. And the throne room of heaven, which, again, our stuff here on earth is copies. It's, foreshadowing, so to speak, or it's replicas of what heaven's going to be like, what the throne room of God is like. Again, go back and go forward and read Revelation and see where John describes the throne room of heaven, and then compare that to the instructions that Moses is given in Exodus for the tabernacle, and then compare that to the instructions that Solomon's given for the temple. They'll all line up with each other. But just know that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. So when you go out and you're talking to your friends and you're going out and you're working on being a disciple and making disciples, we have to have redemption. We have to have redemption from sin, and it must come through the blood of Christ, not the blood of any other type of sacrifice, because nothing else is eternal, certainly not compared to Christ. Christ is an eternal salvation. He's an eternal mediator. He's an eternal being. So our salvation is then eternal. Keep that in mind. And we'll pick up on Hebrews chapter 10 next week. Well, yeah, next week, but I will be filling in at Enterprise Baptist Church, so I won't be here. So God bless, and I'll see you next time. Okay, finish. Stop recording.